Hello everyone, and welcome to this slow journey through the shadows of the past. Before we dive deeper, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to imagine who is following this story from the other side of the world, perhaps in the quiet of the night or the soft light of a late afternoon, while the echoes of history prepare to whisper their secrets. Imagine for a moment the streets of a medieval Roman town. Not the Rome we know from monuments and postcards, but a city alive with smells, noises, and a kind of hidden magic that most people today would find impossible to believe. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meats and freshly baked bread, wafting from small stalls where women in linen tunics sell loaves still warm from the oven, their fingers dusted with flour, and the calls of vendors echo off stone walls, trying to tempt the weary passerby. Children dart between legs, laughing, chasing each other over uneven cobblestones, sometimes pausing to watch a strange shadow flicker against the walls, though no one seems to notice anything unusual at first glance. But those who pay attention, those who walk carefully in the quiet hours before the markets awaken, sometimes see a figure disappearing around the corner, robed in deep blue, carrying lanterns that glow faintly, almost as if the light itself is hesitant to touch them. It is said that these figures are messengers of the old gods, remnants of a belief that persisted long after the empire tried to impose order, and that the shadows themselves sometimes speak, telling secrets to anyone who dares to listen. And yes, the rumors are everywhere. Stories whispered in taverns, sometimes mixed with laughter, other times in terrified silence, about houses where mirrors reflect things that aren't there, or wells that sing at midnight, carrying voices of those who vanished centuries ago. People eat, they sleep, they fight, and yet behind every routine there is the pulse of mystery, because in this medieval Rome, the lines between the ordinary and the extraordinary blur with every passing hour. Some mornings, citizens wake to find the bread in their baskets shaped into symbols they do not understand, or their livestock behaving strangely, staring at corners of barns where no one is, and at night, the wind carries sounds that are neither animal nor human, leaving even the bravest to question if reality itself is fixed. Imagine the markets again, the merchants shouting their wares, the smell of roasting chestnuts mixing with the bitter tang of vinegar from the fish stalls, the chatter of neighbors gossiping about a family that disappeared last week under strange circumstances, supposedly taken by shadows no one could name. In the villas of the wealthy, tapestries hang along the walls, depicting gods and heroes in frozen motion, but visitors sometimes swear they see the threads moving, curling slightly, as if they remember a story being told long after the storyteller has gone. Banquets are not just meals, they are performances, with musicians playing flutes and lyres, dancers spinning in long tunics, and tables laden with roasted fowl, figs, honey cakes, and wine poured from clay jugs into goblets that catch the candlelight, throwing sparks against the vaulted ceilings, while in the corners, quiet servants whisper to each other about the strange happenings they have seen while cleaning the halls. And everywhere, from the narrow alleys to the grand forums, there are tales of people who encountered the inexplicable. A senator who swears a voice spoke to him through the walls of his chamber, warning of a betrayal he could not yet name, or a baker who found a single coin on his counter every morning, shiny and new, even though he had not earned it. These little miracles, or curses, depending on who you ask, fill the days and nights, blending into the rhythm of life. Even in the baths, where citizens come to relax, the warm water scented with herbs and oils, stories are shared quietly, sometimes a warning about a dark figure glimpsed near the aqueducts, or a shadow moving under the water in ways no human could manage. Life continues, people go about their business, but there is always that soft, almost invisible tension, a sense that the world is layered, that behind the familiar, behind the daily routines, there is a current of something that slips just beyond comprehension. And what did the children do? They learned games that echoed the old legends, skipping stones across fountains that were said to contain spirits, laughing without fully understanding the eyes that watched them from the corners, invisible yet attentive. Every meal is a story, every song carries a warning or a lesson, every laugh in the street could hide a gasp of fear. as the citizens of medieval Rome move through a world that is both alive and haunted. Some evenings, when the sky turns a bruised purple and lanterns flicker against the fog rolling in from the Tiber, the shadows lengthen and stretch, brushing against doors, climbing walls, reaching into places no one can enter consciously, but everyone senses. And in the midst of all this, the question persists: what is reality, and what is the unseen weaving itself into the ordinary? It is here, in these quiet moments, in the market bustle, in the scent of herbs and roasting meats, in the laughter of children and whispers of servants, that the mystical heart of medieval Rome beats, soft but persistent, threading its way into every life, reminding those who pay attention that the world is far stranger than it seems, and that history itself is a living, breathing shadow, waiting patiently to tell its secrets. As night falls over the winding streets and hidden courtyards of medieval Rome, the city transforms into a place where whispers travel faster than footsteps, and every flickering candle casts not just light, but uncertainty. The wealthy retire to their chambers, draped in heavy silk and wool, their tables cleared of roasted meats and figs, yet still servants linger, recounting stories of strange figures glimpsed between the columns of the atrium, or sudden cold spots that chill the bones even in front of blazing hearths. The common folk, meanwhile, gather in small clusters around open fires, sharing bread and cheese, occasionally glancing at shadows that move oddly, perhaps shaped by the wind, or perhaps something older, something that knows the streets better than any living citizen. And then there are the alleys that the children are told never to enter, lined with stones worn smooth by centuries, where faint lights appear and vanish without source, where a passerby might hear a soft hum, like a lullaby sung to the city itself. But when they search, no one is there. Everyone has a story. In one small neighborhood near the aqueduct, an old woman sells herbs and dried flowers, her hands gnarled like tree roots, and people claim she can read futures in the steam rising from a bowl of hot water, glimpsing events that may never come to pass. She sometimes murmurs warnings about certain houses, doors that should never be opened after sunset, and children who disappear into the night, never returning, leaving behind only tiny footprints in dust that vanish as soon as someone looks away. Meanwhile, the food markets remain alive with strange energy. Fish glisten in the cold, their eyes reflecting light as though aware of eyes watching them. Merchants call out prices, but sometimes their voices falter mid-sentence, catching on words that were never spoken, and those who listen closely swear they hear secrets, whispers that could not have come from human mouths. In the temples, the priests continue their rituals, candles dripping wax onto stone floors, incense curling into intricate spirals that hang in the air, seemingly taking shapes of animals that do not exist, or of faces that vanish if stared at too long. The common people come for blessings, offering small coins, flowers, or bowls of grain, yet leave with uneasy feelings, convinced that unseen hands have touched them or that invisible eyes have followed them home. And everywhere, rumors move like smoke through the city. Some speak of a library hidden beneath the ruins of the old forum, where books write themselves overnight, recording events that have not yet happened, or perhaps recording thoughts whispered by those who have long since died. Others mention a garden behind a villa where flowers bloom in patterns that mimic constellations, where the air vibrates with soft music that cannot be traced to any instrument, and where even the birds seem to hesitate before landing. Meanwhile, the daily life of the citizens continues, threading itself seamlessly through these strange occurrences. Bakers rise before dawn to knead dough in dim kitchens, their forearms dusted with flour, the scent of yeast rising like a living thing through the streets, while children play quietly in the courtyards, occasionally stopping to stare at corners where shadows gather as if alive. Soldiers patrol, their armor clinking softly, yet even they glance nervously at alleyways that are too dark, convinced that something unseen watches them from above. Merchants argue over prices, women sweep their homes, families share meals of bread, cheese, roasted nuts, and occasionally, wild game, unaware that a strange chill drifts through the city, like a breath from another time. And amidst all this, the air seems to hum with stories waiting to be told. A young scribe, copying texts in his small room by candlelight, notices that letters on the page shift ever so slightly when he looks away, forming names he does not recognize, dates that do not exist, and yet when he speaks of it to friends, they dismiss him, though their eyes betray unease. Even the animals of the city are not immune. Cats with strange golden eyes watch from rooftops, appearing only at twilight, and dogs howl without provocation, their cries echoing off the stone walls, sending shivers down the spines of anyone who listens too closely. And at the center of it all, the Tiber flows silently, reflecting lantern light and moonlight alike, carrying whispers from distant places, perhaps from centuries past, perhaps from the future, murmuring to those who stand too long at its banks, telling of events unseen, of lives intertwined with magic that has never left the earth. Music from the taverns drifts into the streets, a haunting melody of flutes and stringed instruments, sometimes accompanied by laughter, sometimes interrupted by silence so sudden it is as if the world itself is holding its breath. And as citizens settle into sleep, in beds lined with straw and wool, or on cushions in warm chambers, the city does not sleep. It breathes in shadows and exhales stories, ensuring that every corner, every courtyard, every empty street carries the potential for mystery, for discovery, for the inexplicable. Some nights, travelers swear they see ghostly figures pacing along the aqueducts, silhouettes of men and women dressed in centuries-old garb, unaware of the present, repeating gestures, conversations, arguments, as though trapped in a memory that refuses to end. And yet life goes on. Meals are eaten, bread is baked, coins are exchanged, children laugh, and merchants shout. All the while, the hidden world of the mysterious flows beneath and around the ordinary, a current of magic, superstition, and unexplained phenomena, reminding the people of medieval Rome that even in the mundane, the city itself is alive and watching and waiting. The early hours of the night stretch longer than anyone expects, as if the city itself stretches its limbs in silence, and yet the streets remain alive with a quiet energy that only the attentive notice. Lanterns glow weakly against the fog that drifts down narrow alleyways, curling around the edges of doorways, slipping under gates, and leaving a trail of chill that brushes the ankles of those who walk alone. Even the most ordinary tasks acquire a strange resonance. A woman fetching water from the fountain pauses because the reflection in the surface seems to move independently, showing faces she does not recognize, smiling or frowning, shifting in ways impossible for mere ripples. At the same time, in a nearby tavern, a musician plucks at strings on a lyre, the notes floating through the smoky air, yet occasionally pausing mid-melody as though some invisible hand guides the rhythm. Patrons drink warm wine and nibble on roasted chestnuts, exchanging stories that may be true or may simply be exaggerations to pass the long night. Yet no one dares to speak too loudly of the strange happenings that have become routine. Shadows that linger too long, whispers that seem to come from walls, and sudden drafts that extinguish candles without a trace. Outside, the city animals behave oddly. Cats with sleek black fur move in purposeful silence, their eyes glinting with something unspoken, and dogs bark at corners that are utterly empty, their growls echoing in the cold air. It is said by some that certain birds, crows mostly, gather on the rooftops in unusual patterns, forming shapes that some interpret as omens, while others insist it is nothing more than coincidence. But still, the citizens glance up uneasily, because superstition runs deep in hearts and minds that remember the old gods even when the empire has tried to erase them. In the households of the wealthy, the kitchens are filled with activity. Servants stir cauldrons of stew with herbs that release smoke curling in spirals like miniature specters. Bread is kneaded and left to rise in stone ovens, and tables are prepared for meals that will be eaten later under flickering candlelight. Yet even these familiar rituals are tinged with mystery, for sometimes ingredients vanish, or jars of spices are found in places no one recalls setting them, and some swear that the wine in the cellar tastes faintly of salt, even though no sea is near. And everywhere, the marketplace seems to hum with life even when the streets are mostly empty. A lone fishmonger stacks his catch on a wooden table, and suddenly one of the fish leaps, not with life, but as if moved by some invisible current, startling him into dropping coins into the dust. Children, who are otherwise oblivious to danger, giggle and chase each other around fountains that glow faintly at night, seemingly aware of their presence, while dogs follow shadows that are not theirs, yipping and jumping at forms no human eyes can confirm. The city is a patchwork of stories overlapping, each corner holding a secret, each street a memory. Travelers speak in hushed tones of a garden that blooms at night behind a villa, where flowers emit light faintly phosphorescent, petals arranged in patterns resembling constellations, and where no one who ventures in fully returns the same, carrying whispers in their minds of voices that spoke of events yet to come. Rumors circulate in taverns about a cloaked figure who appears at random houses, leaving no footprints, yet somehow communicating warnings or knowledge about hidden dangers, and even the most skeptical begin to glance over their shoulders, fearing that ignoring these stories might bring misfortune. In the quieter neighborhoods, families gather around fires, sharing bread, cheese, roasted nuts, and sometimes small cuts of venison, the aroma mingling with smoke and herbs. Yet every crackle of the fire seems amplified, and every shadow cast by the flames bends oddly, giving the impression of movement where none should exist. Children are instructed to respect the silence of night, yet they often whisper to each other about things they have glimpsed. A figure standing too still in a corner, eyes that reflect the candlelight unnaturally, or the fleeting vision of someone walking down an alley and vanishing behind a wall as if it were air. Even the city's infrastructure, the aqueducts, the fountains, the arches that support the buildings, seems imbued with life, with water that sometimes flows backward, or fountains that trickle with a strange, metallic taste that makes the tongue tingle, while the shadows cast by the arches stretch and twist in ways that do not align with the light sources, creating illusions of passageways and doors that do not exist. And yet the people continue their routines. They rise, they eat, they work, they trade, they laugh, they argue. The bakers knead dough, the smiths hammer iron, the merchants haggle over cloth, and all the while, something unseen moves among them, guiding some, warning others, and leaving an impression on minds sensitive to the extraordinary. Some nights, the river itself seems to speak, a soft murmuring that carries across stone bridges and whispers through the reeds along the banks, speaking words too subtle for most to understand, but those attuned to it swear they hear fragments. Names, places, small pieces of knowledge that hint at larger truths. Even the stars above appear differently here, brighter, more numerous, and arranged in ways that provoke awe and unease, as if the heavens themselves are watching, observing, cataloging, and perhaps even influencing events on the streets below. And through all of this, one realizes that life in medieval Rome is not merely a succession of meals, errands, and workdays. It is an intricate dance with shadows, whispers, and unseen forces that shape experiences in ways subtle and profound, reminding every inhabitant, young or old, rich or poor, that the ordinary world is only a thin veil, barely separating them from the mystical currents that flow continuously through the city, unseen yet undeniably present. As dawn approaches, the city of medieval Rome does not simply wake. It stretches and exhales, revealing secrets that have been hidden in the dim corners of the night. Light creeps over the rooftops, catching on clay tiles slick with dew, and illuminating narrow streets where the shadows of the night linger stubbornly, as if reluctant to release their hold. Bakers emerge from small, smoke-streaked kitchens, carrying trays of bread still steaming, its scent weaving through alleys, drawing the early risers from their homes. Children, their hair tousled from sleep, scamper through courtyards, chasing each other with simple toys. Carved wooden animals, painted balls, and rag dolls stitched together from scraps of cloth. Yet even their laughter cannot fully mask the odd sensations that ripple through the city. The fleeting feeling of being watched, the subtle movement of curtains when no breeze is present, the soft, almost inaudible hum that seems to come from beneath the stones themselves. The streets fill with merchants arranging their stalls, displaying cloth dyed in rich hues, polished pottery, and metalwork that catches the morning sun. But amid these mundane activities, the citizens are keenly aware of anomalies that defy logic. Jars of honey that crystallize overnight in intricate geometric patterns, fruit that ripens too quickly and exudes a faint scent of herbs unknown, and the occasional whisper of a voice in a language no one recalls learning, carried on the wind through the marketplace. Within the larger homes and villas, life continues under the surface of normalcy. Servants pour water from jugs into basins carved from marble, clean floors with brooms bound tightly with straw, and prepare meals of porridge, cheese, roasted fowl, and wine, while the families they serve go about their routines, dressing in tunics, sandals, and robes, adjusting belts and head coverings, but always with an eye to the shadows and corners, to the glimmer of movement that does not match any known source. And in the small chapels tucked behind high walls, priests chant prayers to gods long forgotten by most, their voices echoing off stone walls, creating a resonance that seems to linger long after the last syllable fades, and which some say carries messages only certain souls can understand. It is in these quiet moments that the mystical pulse of the city is most evident. A traveler might pause to watch a fountain where the water moves in strange patterns, curling into spirals and arches that seem deliberate, almost like symbols left by invisible hands, while above, crows circle in formations that some interpret as warnings or guidance. Meanwhile, the aqueducts hum softly with the movement of water, and those who listen closely claim to hear names, fragments of conversations, and hints of events yet to come. In the workshops, blacksmiths pound iron with rhythmic precision, sparks flying in arcs, yet occasionally a hammer misses the mark by itself, striking the metal differently than the smith intended, leaving shapes in the molten iron that resemble eyes or faces. Cobblers, potters, and weavers work similarly, discovering patterns in leather, clay, and cloth that appear overnight, as if touched by unseen artisans. Even in the most ordinary of routines, the mystical seeps in. Families gather for breakfast of bread and cheese, sometimes with figs or olives, and notice that a loaf of bread is shaped oddly, forming symbols no one can read, or that a shadow moves independently on the floor, stopping only when observed directly. Conversations at the market often meander from mundane barter to hushed tales. A fisherman who swears he heard whispers beneath the surface of the river, telling him the names of people long dead. A merchant who found a coin that gleamed with impossible clarity, though it had never been minted in any known city. A child who claims to have seen a lantern floating along the rooftops, carried by no one. And yet, life continues. Dogs chase rats, cats prowl silently on the rooftops, and people rise and fall in their daily rhythms, eating, working, laughing, arguing, and praying. But the air itself seems to retain memory. Stones remember footsteps that have long since vanished, walls remember voices long silenced, and the wind carries echoes of conversations from centuries past, brushing past ears that are attuned enough to listen. At night, shadows grow longer, twisting and stretching unnaturally, crawling across walls, and those who sleep near open windows sometimes awake to find the shapes of faces reflected faintly in the moonlight on their floors or walls. Some of the most peculiar tales revolve around gardens and hidden courtyards, where flowers bloom in impossible colors, petals forming shapes that suggest messages or warnings, and the air carries scents that remind visitors of dreams they cannot recall. Certain fountains sing at midnight, a melody faint yet distinct, drawing both the curious and the fearful, and leaving an imprint in memory that cannot be explained. And so the city moves in this constant rhythm of the ordinary and the extraordinary, the mundane brushing against the mystical in ways subtle yet undeniable. Every meal eaten, every coin exchanged, every footstep across cobblestones carries with it the pulse of the unseen. Even those who refuse to believe in omens or spirits find themselves uneasy when shadows behave oddly, or when familiar objects seem to shift slightly when unobserved. Medieval Rome is a place of contradictions, bustling with life yet constantly reminded of forces beyond comprehension. A city where children play games of laughter and mischief while unseen eyes trace their movements, and where merchants haggle over prices while whispers from the past and future mingle with the scent of herbs and bread. It is a city alive in ways few can fully grasp, where every corner, courtyard, and alley is a stage for events both ordinary and impossible, and where the line between the seen and the unseen blurs, leaving its inhabitants in a perpetual dance with the mysteries that surround them, shaping daily life as much as bread, wine, or fire ever could. The morning light spreads slowly over the rooftops of medieval Rome, illuminating not only the familiar stones and clay tiles, but also the subtle signs of a city steeped in mystery, where the ordinary intertwines with the inexplicable. In the kitchens of small homes, the aroma of porridge and freshly baked bread mingles with the earthy scent of herbs, rosemary, thyme, and mint, carefully crushed by the hands of housewives. Women whose lives are governed by routines that seem mundane yet are threaded with the undercurrent of the unseen. As they stir cauldrons and knead dough, they glance frequently at corners where shadows linger, sometimes seeming to pulse with a life of their own. Outside, the markets are beginning to awaken. Merchants arrange baskets of apples, figs, olives, and dried meats, their voices calling out prices, while shoppers weave between stalls, exchanging small greetings and gossip. Yet amid the bustle, subtle anomalies are impossible to ignore. A loaf of bread might appear unusually dark, not burned, but patterned with shapes that suggest letters or symbols. Coins sometimes vanish from a purse only to reappear in an entirely different location. Even the air itself seems to carry faint whispers, words too soft for ordinary ears but perceptible to those who listen carefully, like echoes from a past life or a world overlapping with their own. The streets are alive with children, running and laughing, their simple games shadowed by unseen presences that seem to follow their movements, weaving silently through the cobblestones. They pause occasionally, pointing to the corner of an alley where nothing visible exists, yet their wide eyes betray curiosity, fascination, and just a hint of fear. Meanwhile, in the villas of the wealthy, servants pour water into marble basins, sweep floors, light oil lamps, and prepare meals of roasted fowl, cheese, and honeyed cakes, while the families themselves discuss politics, trade, and local rumors in voices low enough to carry only to the attentive. They occasionally glance at tapestries or paintings, noticing subtle movements in the figures depicted, though they convince themselves it is the flicker of sunlight or candlelight playing tricks on their eyes. Even the animals of the city behave strangely. Dogs howl at corners with no visible source of disturbance. Cats perch on high ledges, eyes gleaming unnaturally, following movements invisible to human observers. Birds circle over the aqueducts in formations that seem too precise to be random. And then there are the stories, ever present, drifting through the city like smoke from a fire that no one can fully locate. A blacksmith swears that his forge sometimes produces shapes in molten iron that resemble faces. A potter notices patterns in clay vessels that were not intended. A fisherman along the riverbank hears voices beneath the water, naming those who are yet to arrive or those who have long since vanished. The people exchange these tales quietly, unsure whether to laugh or tremble, but the tension is always there, lingering in the air like a perfume that cannot be named. By midday, the sun is high, and yet shadows remain stubborn in narrow alleys, clinging to walls, stretching in impossible directions, sometimes even splitting as if two lights exist where only one should be. Citizens go about daily tasks. They fetch water from fountains, carry bundles of firewood, mend clothes, grind grain, and trade goods, all while a subtle undercurrent of magic and mystery threads through every moment. The gardens hidden behind high walls are another source of fascination and unease. Flowers bloom in shapes that mimic constellations, their colors defying ordinary explanation. The air hums with a faint vibration, almost like music, that cannot be traced to any instrument, and the ground sometimes feels warm to the touch, as if alive with memory. Even the river that cuts through the city seems to act with intent, whispering and rippling at moments that suggest awareness, its surface occasionally reflecting not the sky above but fleeting images of people and events long gone, or yet to come. By evening, the city transforms again. Lanterns are lit, their light dancing across cobblestones and walls, throwing long shadows that twist and crawl. Music drifts from taverns, the haunting notes of flutes, the soft pluck of lyres, and the rhythm of drums that echo softly, blending with the murmur of voices telling stories, trading news, and whispering secrets. Those who remain on the streets sense a presence, something just beyond comprehension, something that moves between the seen and unseen. Stories circulate of cloaked figures appearing in empty courtyards, leaving no footprints, of lights floating along alleyways with no source, of mirrors reflecting images that are not present in the room. Even as life continues, meals eaten, work completed, coins exchanged, the city pulses with a hidden rhythm, one that reminds all inhabitants that reality is layered, that the ordinary is but a thin veil over a world richer, stranger, and more mysterious than anyone dares to fully acknowledge. As night deepens, families retire to beds, children dream of figures glimpsed in fleeting shadows, and the city itself seems to exhale, as if satisfied that the ordinary and the mystical have danced together once again. The wind carries the faint scent of herbs, bread, and wood smoke, blending with whispers, faint laughter, and the distant sound of water over stones, leaving the city suspended in a quiet tension, where every corner could hold a secret, every alley could conceal a story, and every breath of air reminds those who are listening that in medieval Rome, the boundaries between the living, the dead, and the unseen are far thinner than one would expect, and that life, as familiar as it seems, is intertwined with the pulse of mystery that never ceases, never sleeps, and never truly lets go. As the night deepens over medieval Rome, the city seems to breathe in a rhythm entirely its own, a pulse that the inhabitants have learned to sense, though few can explain it. The alleys and streets, usually bustling during the day, now hold a quiet, almost tense stillness, punctuated by the distant clatter of a cart wheel or the soft murmur of voices drifting from windows left ajar. In the smaller homes, families gather around simple wooden tables, eating coarse bread, cheese, and occasionally roasted nuts, the aroma mingling with the lingering smoke of fires that have burned all day. But even these humble meals are not untouched by the strange. Shadows on the walls twist independently of the flickering candlelight, stretching and curling into shapes that seem deliberate, forming figures that vanish when looked at directly. Children, even as they eat, glance nervously toward the corners, convinced that eyes watch them from places unseen. In wealthier villas, the scene is not so different, though more ornate. Banquets feature roasted fowl, honeyed cakes, figs, and wine poured into goblets that catch candlelight in unexpected ways, throwing shadows that move and shift beyond explanation. Servants go about their work in hushed tones, some swapping whispers about the oddities they have noticed. Mirrors that reflect images not present, silverware that occasionally seems to tremble on its own, and faint music that drifts through hallways without a visible source. Outside, the city's animals continue to act strangely. Cats prowl silently across rooftops, their eyes glinting unnaturally. Dogs howl into empty streets, their cries echoing off stone walls and archways. And birds gather in unusual formations on the highest towers, leaving observers unnerved by patterns that seem intentional. Even the river, ever present, carries its own mysteries. Fishermen along the banks report seeing shapes beneath the surface, silhouettes that move deliberately, sometimes vanishing as soon as they are approached. At night, the water seems to carry voices, murmuring names and events in a language that feels familiar and foreign all at once. The market squares, normally crowded with merchants, are quiet now, though the remnants of the day linger. Baskets of fruits and vegetables left behind, coins scattered in odd patterns, and a faint hum that some insist comes from the stones themselves. It is in these quiet moments that the city's magic, or whatever force governs these anomalies, is most palpable. In hidden courtyards, flowers bloom in colors that defy nature, petals forming intricate geometric patterns, some resembling symbols or letters, others taking shapes that stir unease in those who glimpse them. Air around these blooms seems to hum faintly, a vibration almost musical, yet too subtle to trace to any instrument. Even the aqueducts carry whispers, a soft, almost imperceptible flow of sound that imitates words or phrases, sometimes giving advice, sometimes issuing warnings, though only those attuned can discern the meaning. The inhabitants of Rome move through this layered reality, carrying out their daily routines with a mixture of normalcy and careful awareness. Women sweep floors, stir cooking pots, and tend to children, glancing at corners and shadows with a subtle vigilance. Men carry bundles of firewood, grind grain, and hammer iron, their motion steady yet punctuated by moments of surprise when objects behave unpredictably. A hammer striking iron to form shapes resembling faces, a coin appearing in a pocket where it had not been placed, or a loaf of bread rising into patterns that resemble symbols long forgotten. Even leisure activities are infused with mystery. Children play games in the courtyards, chasing one another around fountains that glow faintly at night, seemingly aware of their presence, while storytellers at taverns weave tales of cloaked figures, floating lanterns, and spirits that watch from shadows. At times, these stories are confirmed. An empty street reveals footprints that vanish on touch, a door opens without anyone having entered, or a candle flickers with a movement that has no source. The temples, too, are sites of both devotion and unease. Priests chant prayers to gods both remembered and forgotten, their voices creating a resonance that lingers in the air long after the last word, carrying with it impressions of events past, present, and perhaps future. Pilgrims and common worshippers sense this energy, some feeling reassured, others unnerved, as if reality itself is layered, with hidden depths that are never fully accessible. And above it all, the stars in the sky seem sharper, brighter, arranged in constellations that do not match the charts in any known texts, forming patterns that some interpret as signs or warnings. The city is alive not just in the ordinary sense, but with an invisible current that flows through every stone, every wall, every fountain, and every breath of wind. Life continues. Meals are eaten, children laugh, merchants haggle, bakers knead dough, but beneath these routines flows a constant, unseen rhythm. The city moves in cycles of light and shadow, of ordinary tasks overlaid with mystical forces, and every inhabitant, whether aware or not, dances along with it. Even as people retire for the night, laying on beds stuffed with straw or cushioned with wool, the city does not rest. Shadows gather, whispers persist, and the pulse of mystery continues, threading itself through dreams, through water, through the stone, and through the very air, reminding all who inhabit Rome that their world is far more intricate, strange, and alive than it seems. Every flicker of candlelight, every rustle in the streets, every ripple in the river carries meaning, warning, or message, and those who pay attention, however subtly, learn that to live here is to navigate a world where the ordinary and extraordinary exist side by side, indistinguishably, for those who know how to look. The city begins to settle into a strange rhythm as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch unnaturally along the narrow streets and courtyards of medieval Rome. Lanterns are lit, but their glow seems hesitant, flickering as if uncertain whether to illuminate or to hide the secrets that linger in the corners. Citizens continue their routines. Women gather herbs and prepare meals of roasted meats, grains, cheeses, and figs, their fingers moving deftly while glancing occasionally at shadows that seem to bend and twist independently of the light. Children chase each other across cobblestones, laughter mingling with an underlying tension as fleeting glimpses of figures in cloaks or shapes that disappear as quickly as they appear keep them cautious. The air is thick with the sense of smoke, bread, and the river that winds through the city, carrying not only water but rumors, whispers, and the faint traces of events that have already happened or are yet to come. Merchants in the market square display their wares, calling prices with practiced voices, yet every so often a basket of fruit will spill on its own, or a coin rolls from the counter as though nudged by an unseen hand, prompting startled glances and quiet speculation. In the workshops, the craft continues as usual, yet anomalies persist. Blacksmiths discover faces and symbols forming in molten iron. Potters find vessels patterned with designs they did not intend. Weavers notice threads shifting in their looms, forming strange letters or images that vanish when examined too closely. And above all, the city pulses with a hidden current, a rhythm of life and magic that flows through stones, walls, water, and air. The fountains and courtyards continue their subtle performances, water flowing in spirals, sometimes forming shapes that hint at stories or omens, while the flowers in hidden gardens bloom with colors beyond ordinary perception, petals curling into geometric patterns that seem purposeful. Even the cats and dogs move differently at night. Cats slink along walls and roofs with unnerving precision, observing from heights and shadows. Dogs bark at spaces where no one stands and sometimes howl at nothing, sending echoes that linger longer than natural sound should. Within the larger homes, the wealthy host their families and guests with care. Yet even the most meticulous attention to order cannot fully contain the strangeness that permeates the city. Mirrors reflect images that shift when unobserved. Candles flicker and sputter though there is no draft. Footsteps echo softly in empty corridors, and music seems to drift from rooms that are locked and unoccupied. Meanwhile, stories circulate among the citizens like invisible threads, weaving a tapestry of collective unease. One tale speaks of a cloaked figure who appears outside certain homes at midnight, disappearing as quickly as it arrives, leaving behind only a faint, metallic scent and a lingering chill. Another tells of a well in the outskirts of the city that hums softly at night, producing vibrations that some claim carry words of warning or prophecy. Even travelers passing through notice the peculiarities. A coin left on the ground that vanishes when picked up, a stray lantern floating along a street without a hand to guide it, or a shadow moving against the flow of the wind. And yet, life carries on. Meals are eaten, bread is baked, coins exchanged, children play, and the rhythm of ordinary existence continues. But within this rhythm flows a subtle undercurrent of the extraordinary. The air itself seems charged, carrying messages, impressions, and the memory of events past and future. Priests chant in temples, their voices creating vibrations that linger long after the last word, filling the halls with a resonance that some perceive as guidance, others as warning. The stars above shine with an unusual clarity, forming patterns that sometimes align with hidden omens, or so some say, while the Tiber flows quietly, reflecting the moonlight in ways that suggest not just water, but a silent, observant presence beneath its surface. In the narrow alleys and empty courtyards, echoes of the past and present intermingle. Footsteps that seem to belong to no one can be heard at times. Whispers drift along the streets without any visible source, and doors occasionally open or close on their own, as if the city itself participates in a performance that only the most attentive can perceive. Children are often the first to notice these occurrences. They point and laugh nervously at shadows that move independently, at lights that float without visible holders, or at small creatures that vanish when approached. Adults notice too, but they convince themselves that imagination or fatigue must account for the strange events, even as unease creeps into their hearts. At night, the city does not sleep. The shadows gather, the whispers persist, and the pulse of mystery threads through every stone and every breath of air. Life continues, yet every footstep, every gesture, every glance carries weight, as though the city itself is alive and attentive, observing the inhabitants who move through it, intertwined with its secrets. And in these moments, when all seems ordinary, the mystical presence reminds the people of Rome that reality is not as solid as it appears, that the unseen flows just beneath the surface, shaping their days and nights, guiding some, warning others, and leaving an imprint of wonder, fear, and fascination on everyone who dares to look carefully enough. As the evening settles over the rooftops and narrow alleys of medieval Rome, a peculiar stillness falls that is unlike the ordinary quiet of night. The lamps flicker with a hesitant glow, as if reluctant to illuminate the secrets that linger behind doors and in hidden courtyards, and even the air feels heavier, carrying with it the faint, almost imperceptible vibrations of events unseen. The citizens continue their routines, yet every gesture and glance is subtly influenced by the persistent undercurrent of mystery. In small homes, the aroma of bread freshly baked mingles with the earthy scent of herbs. Rosemary, thyme, and sage crushed in mortar and pestle by careful hands. Families sit down for meals of porridge, cheese, roasted nuts, and occasionally wild game, sharing stories with quiet laughter, though eyes constantly flick toward corners where shadows pool unnaturally, shifting in ways that defy the source of light. Children play near fountains and narrow passages, their games filled with laughter and energy, yet a small, unspoken fear lingers, for sometimes fleeting figures appear just at the edge of vision. Cloaked shapes, flickering lights, or the faint silhouettes of animals that vanish when approached. In the villas of the wealthy, elaborate dinners are served. Roasted fowl, figs drizzled with honey, spiced wine in polished goblets, and sweet pastries that glisten under the soft glow of candlelight. Servants carry dishes carefully, yet even they cannot ignore the subtle anomalies that seem to touch their work. Mirrors reflecting images that do not exist, shadows moving independently of the flame, and the faint sound of whispers that vanish when directly sought. Markets, though mostly quiet at night, remain imbued with unusual energy. Fruits and vegetables are arranged with almost deliberate precision, sometimes forming shapes that suggest letters, symbols, or omens. Coins occasionally roll on their own, baskets topple without wind, and those who linger after dark feel a presence watching, subtle yet undeniably present. Blacksmiths pound iron with steady rhythm, yet the molten metal sometimes forms faces or symbols unbidden. Weavers notice threads shifting into patterns that resemble forgotten glyphs. Potters see vessels etched with designs that appear only after a night passes. Even the rivers, aqueducts, and fountains hum with strange currents. Water seems to flow in deliberate patterns, curling into spirals and shapes, reflecting not only the light of lanterns and moon, but sometimes the faintest impressions of figures no one recognizes. Citizens often whisper about the Tiber carrying messages. A fisherman claims to hear names beneath the surface, calling out in hushed tones of warning or guidance. The stories circulate. A cloaked figure wandering courtyards, disappearing without a trace. A lantern floating down a street as if guided by invisible hands. Doors opening or closing by themselves. Shadows twisting into impossible angles. Mirrors reflecting forms not present. Some speak of gardens tucked behind high walls, where flowers bloom at night in phosphorescent hues, forming constellations in their petals. A faint, musical vibration hangs in the air, imperceptible to most, yet those who are sensitive feel its resonance, a subtle hum that seems alive. Even the city's animals behave unnaturally. Cats stalk silently along roofs, golden eyes reflecting the glow of lamps below, while dogs bark or howl at corners where no one stands, and birds gather in precise, patterned formations atop towers, seemingly aware of invisible observers. Within the temples, priests chant in low, measured tones, performing rituals to gods long forgotten by the general populace, yet whose influence lingers. Candles drip wax onto stone floors in patterns that some interpret as messages. Incense smoke curls into shapes that defy physics, forming animals, faces, or symbols that vanish if stared at too long. Worshippers leave with unease, sensing touches in the air that were never there, glimpses of shapes at the periphery of vision, and subtle impressions on the mind that persist long after leaving the temple. Life continues in tandem with the mystical. Children laugh, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, and soldiers patrol streets, their armor clinking softly. Yet all actions are subtly altered by the unseen. Coins disappear or reappear in impossible locations. Footsteps echo when no one is present, and fleeting glimpses of cloaked figures or floating lights remind the citizens that reality is layered, only partially revealed. Even in moments of leisure, there is tension. Taverns hum with conversation and music, yet whispers of the extraordinary drift through the air. Floating lanterns, moving shadows, and unaccountable sounds. Travelers passing through remark on the strangeness. A coin rolls away with no hand to guide it. A door creaks open though no one approaches, and the faintest whispers brush against their ears, carrying names, places, and events they cannot recognize but feel compelled to remember. By midnight, the city seems to pulse with life that cannot be fully seen. Every stone, every fountain, every leaf, every breath of wind carries a memory or a secret. Shadows twist, water flows in impossible arcs, and every human gesture, whether mundane or deliberate, is observed by forces unseen, shaping reality in subtle ways that the citizens cannot fully explain. In this environment, the ordinary and extraordinary coexist inseparably. Every meal eaten, every step taken, every laugh, every whisper, every exchange of coins, every glance into a corner, is threaded with mystery, reminding inhabitants that Rome is alive not only in the visible sense but in a hidden, intricate, and persistent rhythm of the mystical. The city watches, the shadows move, and the pulse of the unseen continues, leaving traces of wonder, unease, and fascination that extend into every day, every night, and every dream of those who live within its walls. Night deepens over medieval Rome, and the city transforms in ways that only the most observant notice, for shadows lengthen and twist, reflecting forms that defy logic, and the air carries a subtle hum, a vibration almost imperceptible but unmistakable to those attuned to the unseen. In narrow alleyways, the scent of smoke and roasted meat mixes with the earthy aroma of herbs, creating an atmosphere both familiar and unsettling. Families move quietly within their homes, tending fires, preparing meals, and sharing bread, cheese, and figs. Yet their eyes constantly flick toward corners where shadows bend independently, stretching and curling into shapes that suggest movement without source. Children, ever sensitive to the unusual, pause in mid-step to point at fleeting glimpses. A cloaked figure disappearing around a corner, a lantern floating without hand, or a shadow sliding across the wall in ways impossible for a human form. In wealthier villas, opulent dinners are underway, the aroma of roasted fowl, spiced wine, honeyed cakes, and figs filling the halls. Servants move with care, but even they cannot ignore the anomalies. Mirrors reflecting images that shift when unobserved, shadows that do not align with candlelight, and soft murmurs that seem to drift from walls themselves. Markets, usually dormant at night, retain traces of the day's bustle. Baskets of fruits and vegetables appear in patterns that suggest messages. Coins move of their own accord, and the wind carries whispers whose source cannot be identified, yet which seem meaningful to those willing to listen. In the workshops, craftsmen continue to notice strange occurrences. Blacksmiths find faces or symbols in molten iron. Weavers see threads shift into complex patterns that resemble runes. Potters discover vessels etched with designs that were not intended. Even the rivers, fountains, and aqueducts seem aware, their waters curling into shapes that suggest messages, their currents murmuring in low tones, carrying names, places, or events unknown to the hearers. Tales circulate through the city, a cloaked figure appearing silently in courtyards, leaving only a faint metallic scent. A well that hums at night, producing vibrations that some interpret as warnings. Lanterns floating along streets with no visible carrier, doors opening or closing without explanation, shadows stretching or splitting unnaturally. Gardens hidden behind high walls bloom in impossible colors at night, petals curling into intricate geometric patterns resembling constellations, while a faint musical vibration hangs in the air, barely perceptible, yet impossible to ignore for those attuned to its resonance. Animals too participate in the strange rhythm. Cats stalk the rooftops silently, their golden eyes reflecting lamp glow unnaturally, while dogs bark at empty corners or howl at nothing, leaving echoes that persist longer than natural sound should allow. Birds gather atop towers in precise, coordinated patterns that seem deliberate, unsettling observers who notice too late. Within temples, priests chant in low tones, performing rituals to gods long forgotten. Candles drip wax into intricate designs. Incense curls into shapes that defy gravity, forming images of animals, faces, or symbols that vanish when examined directly. Worshippers leave the temples altered, sensing touches in the air that were never there, glimpses of forms at the periphery of vision, and faint impressions that linger on the mind. Life, however, continues in tandem with the mystical. Children play, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, soldiers patrol streets. Yet all actions are subtly influenced by unseen forces. Coins vanish or appear inexplicably, footsteps echo without origin, fleeting figures brush past the edge of perception, and lights float without source. Even in moments of leisure, tension remains. Taverns hum with conversation and music, but stories of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and unexplainable sounds persist, woven into the collective consciousness. Travelers passing through remark on the strangeness. A coin rolls away without being touched. A door creaks open with no hand to move it. Whispers brush against ears, carrying names, places, and events they cannot comprehend yet feel compelled to remember. By midnight, the city pulses with life that transcends ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind carries a memory, a secret, or a hint of the unseen. Shadows twist, water flows in impossible arcs. Human gestures intertwine with the subtle currents of mystery, shaping reality in ways that are barely perceptible yet undeniable. The ordinary and extraordinary exist side by side, inseparable, threading every meal, every step, every laugh, every whisper, and every glance into corners with a persistent reminder. Rome is alive beyond what the eye sees. The city watches, the shadows move, the pulse of the unseen continues, leaving traces of wonder, unease, and fascination that extend into every day, night, and dream of those who dwell within its walls. The inhabitants navigate life under the watch of forces they cannot see, yet which shape their reality, reminding them that their world is far richer, stranger, and more alive than any ordinary eye can discern. As the moon climbs higher above the spires and rooftops of medieval Rome, the city reveals facets of itself invisible during the bustling daylight hours, facets that seem to hum with an energy beyond comprehension. The air is thick with the mingling scents of herbs, wood smoke, and the river that winds silently through the city, reflecting moonlight that catches on ripples in ways that seem almost deliberate, forming fleeting images of people and places that may never have existed, or perhaps that exist elsewhere in time. In the homes, families sit close to flickering fires, consuming bread, cheese, figs, and roasted meats, their conversations gentle, yet often interrupted by subtle disturbances. Shadows twist against the walls, stretching into impossible angles, and faint murmurs slip through the air, sometimes carrying words, sometimes only indistinct syllables that linger in the mind like a half-remembered dream. Children, sensitive to these anomalies, often freeze mid-play to point at fleeting glimpses. A lantern drifting along a street with no hand to guide it, a cloaked figure slipping between buildings, or a shadow that seems to move independently of any light source. Even the wealthy in their villas are not spared these oddities. Elaborate feasts of spiced wine, honeyed cakes, roasted fowl, and exotic fruits fill long tables. Yet mirrors reflect subtle distortions, flames of candles flicker in odd patterns, and footsteps echo in empty corridors, leaving both servants and masters unsettled. Outside, the market squares, emptied for the night, hum with remnants of the day's life. Baskets of fruit arranged with uncanny symmetry, coins scattered in patterns that hint at messages, and an occasional whisper in the wind that seems almost intelligible. In workshops, craftsmen continue to notice subtle phenomena. Blacksmiths find faces etched in molten iron. Weavers discover threads rearranged into intricate symbols overnight. Potters see vessels inscribed with shapes unformed by human hand. The fountains and aqueducts carry their own mysteries. Water flows in patterns that suggest intelligence. spiraling into forms that resemble symbols or letters, reflecting moonlight in ways that sometimes reveal fleeting, ghostly images. Tales of the city's mysteries continue to circulate. A cloaked figure appears in courtyards and vanishes without a trace. A well hums at midnight, its vibrations felt more than heard, interpreted as warnings or guidance. Lanterns float down streets with no source of illumination. Doors open and close of their own volition. Shadows twist and split in impossible ways. Gardens tucked behind high walls bloom in colors beyond ordinary perception. Petals curling into constellations and geometric patterns. A faint, musical vibration permeates the air, perceptible only to those attuned, creating a subtle resonance that feels alive. The city's animals mirror the unnatural rhythm. Cats stalk rooftops silently, golden eyes gleaming in the lamplight. Dogs bark at empty corners or howl at nothing, echoes lingering far longer than natural. Birds gather atop towers in precise, coordinated patterns that unsettle any observer who notices. Within the temples, priests chant low, hypnotic prayers, performing rituals to gods long forgotten by the majority of inhabitants. Wax drips from candles in intricate designs. Incense curls into improbable shapes. Animals, faces, and symbols that vanish when directly observed. Worshippers leave with sensations of touches in the air that were never there, glimpses of shapes in peripheral vision, and impressions lingering in the mind that resist clear interpretation. Despite the strangeness, life persists. Children play, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, soldiers patrol streets. Yet the mystical pulse of the city subtly influences every action. Coins disappear and reappear inexplicably. Footsteps echo with no origin. Fleeting figures brush the edges of perception, and lights float unaccounted for. Leisure is intertwined with tension. Taverns resonate with conversation and music, but whispers of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and unexplainable sounds permeate the atmosphere, leaving patrons alert even as they drink. Travelers passing through note the oddities. Coins roll on their own, doors creak open with no hand, whispers brush their ears, carrying names, places, and events both unfamiliar and strangely compelling. By the early hours, the city pulses with a life that transcends ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind holds memory, secrets, and hints of the unseen. Shadows twist, water flows in arcs that defy logic, human actions intertwine with the currents of mystery, shaping reality subtly yet undeniably. The ordinary and extraordinary exist inseparably, threading through meals, steps, laughter, whispers, and glances into corners, constantly reminding inhabitants that Rome is alive far beyond what the eye perceives. The city watches, shadows shift, the pulse of the unseen continues, leaving traces of wonder, unease, and fascination in every day, night, and dream of those who live within its walls. To reside in Rome is to navigate a world where what is ordinary is merely the surface layer of a far richer, stranger, and more alive reality than anyone could anticipate. As the night drapes itself fully over medieval Rome, an unusual hush blankets the city, though it is not silence. The streets, courtyards, and alleys carry faint echoes, subtle shifts in sound that hint at movements invisible to the eye. In humble homes, families sit by hearths, consuming simple meals of porridge, bread, roasted meats, cheese, and figs. Yet the ordinary rhythm of eating and talking is punctuated by the occasional inexplicable occurrence. Shadows twist in impossible directions, flickering candlelight casts forms not anchored in reality, and whispers drift softly through the rooms, sometimes forming recognizable words, sometimes remaining tantalizingly indistinct. Children, particularly sensitive to the unseen, often freeze mid-step or mid-laugh, pointing to fleeting shapes at the edge of vision. A cloaked figure vanishing around a corner, a lantern floating without any visible holder, or a shadow that stretches across walls in a manner defying logic. In the more affluent villas, opulent dinners unfold. Roasted fowl glazed with honey, Spiced wine, figs, and sweet pastries are served in polished goblets on long tables, yet anomalies persist. Mirrors reflect images that subtly distort. Flames flicker in unusual patterns, and the faint echo of footsteps in empty corridors unsettles both masters and servants. Markets, although emptied for the night, retain traces of the day's activity. Baskets of fruits and vegetables sometimes shift as if arranged with intention. Coins scatter in patterns that suggest hidden messages, and gentle whispers float in the air, carrying meaning to those perceptive enough to catch them. In workshops, craftsmen continue to encounter oddities. Blacksmiths find faces etched spontaneously into molten iron. Weavers notice threads rearranging themselves into intricate patterns resembling forgotten runes. Potters discover vessels inscribed with symbols never intended. The fountains, aqueducts, and rivers hum with subtle life. Water moves in spirals and shapes that suggest consciousness, reflecting moonlight to reveal fleeting, ghostly images. Stories continue to circulate. A cloaked figure slips through courtyards only to vanish moments later. A well hums at midnight, producing vibrations interpreted as guidance or warning. Lanterns float down streets without any hand to hold them. Doors open or close inexplicably, and shadows twist in impossible ways. Hidden gardens bloom with astonishing colors at night, petals forming geometric patterns and constellations, while faint musical vibrations resonate in the air, perceptible only to the attuned. The city's animals mirror the unnatural rhythm. Cats silently stalk the rooftops, eyes gleaming unnaturally. Dogs bark or howl at corners where nothing seems present. Birds perch in coordinated, deliberate formations atop towers, creating patterns that unsettle any observer. Temples echo with low, hypnotic chants as priests perform ancient rituals to forgotten gods. Candles drip wax into intricate, unplanned patterns, incense curls into improbable forms. Faces, animals, symbols that vanish when directly observed. Worshippers depart with subtle impressions. Touches in the air that were never present, glimpses of forms at the periphery of vision, lingering sensations that remain inexplicably long after leaving. Despite the strange occurrences, life persists. Children laugh, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, and soldiers patrol streets. Yet every action is subtly influenced by unseen forces. Coins vanish or appear without explanation. Footsteps echo with no source. Fleeting figures brush past perception, and lights float unaccounted for. Even moments of leisure are tinged with unease. Taverns hum with conversation and music, but whispers of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and unexplainable sounds permeate the atmosphere. Travelers passing through notice oddities. Coins rolling without touch, doors opening with no hand, whispers brushing against ears carrying names, places, and events unfamiliar yet compelling. By midnight, Rome pulses with life beyond ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind carries memory, secret, or glimpse of the unseen. Shadows twist, water flows in improbable arcs. Human actions intertwine with currents of mystery, shaping reality subtly yet undeniably. The ordinary and extraordinary exist inseparably, threading through meals, steps, laughter, whispers, and glances, reminding inhabitants that Rome is alive far beyond what the eye perceives. The city watches, shadows move. The pulse of the unseen continues, leaving traces of wonder, unease, and fascination in every day, night, and dream of its citizens. Life here is a careful navigation between the visible and invisible, the mundane and the mystical, with every ordinary moment carrying the possibility of the extraordinary, each breath, glance, and step threaded through with the delicate yet persistent rhythm of the unseen. As dawn creeps slowly over the terracotta rooftops of medieval Rome, a soft, uncertain light filters through the narrow streets. Yet the city is far from ordinary. Even in this early hour, before the bustling crowds emerge, the traces of the night's strange currents linger, whispering through shadows and echoing in the stillness. Families stir in their homes, stretching and preparing simple breakfasts of bread, cheese, figs, and porridge. Yet the aroma of the hearth mingles with faint traces of smoke that have no visible source. Shadows twist subtly across walls, moving independently of the morning sun, and faint, almost musical murmurs drift through the rooms, carrying syllables that seem just beyond comprehension. Children awaken quickly, often pointing toward the corners where the night's figures linger in faint, shifting outlines, shapes of cloaked figures, glowing lights, or moving shadows that vanish when approached. In the grand villas, servants rise early to light fires and prepare elaborate meals, yet mirrors reflect images that seem delayed or distorted, while the floorboards occasionally creak as if responding to invisible footsteps. Courtyards reveal water fountains that ripple unnaturally, sending reflections twisting in the early light to form images that seem familiar yet unplaceable. And in hidden gardens, flowers bloom in impossible colors, petals curling into geometric patterns or symbols, as if reaching toward an unseen sky. Markets begin to hum with life, yet anomalies persist. Coins roll in odd directions, baskets of produce appear in formations resembling messages, and the wind carries whispers whose source is never clear, as if the city itself speaks to those willing to listen. Craftsmen continue to notice subtle signs of the mystical in their work. Blacksmiths find faces etched into hot iron, weavers discover threads rearranging themselves into intricate, undecipherable patterns overnight, and potters see vessels etched with forms that vanish if scrutinized too closely. Even the Tiber seems alive, flowing in arcs that seem purposeful, catching sunlight to reveal ghostly shapes beneath the surface, moving with a rhythm that defies the ordinary flow of water. Tales of the previous night's encounters circulate among the people. A cloaked figure appearing briefly in a courtyard, a well humming in low, imperceptible tones, a lantern floating down a street without a holder, doors opening or closing on their own, shadows twisting in impossible shapes. These events are discussed in hushed tones over breakfast, yet most insist that ordinary duties must continue. Children still play in the courtyards, laughter mingling with a cautious awareness of the lingering mysteries. Cats continue to prowl rooftops with eyes glinting unnaturally. Dogs pause to bark or howl at corners empty of any visible presence, and birds gather atop towers in patterns so deliberate they seem to form a silent communication. Temples are prepared for the morning worshippers, priests chanting in low, steady tones, their voices vibrating through stone halls in ways that leave impressions on the soul. Wax drips from candles into intricate, unplanned patterns. Incense curls into shapes that hint at animals, faces, or symbols, vanishing when observed too closely. Worshippers depart altered, carrying faint impressions of touches that were never present, glimpses at the edge of perception, and thoughts that seem to have been seeded by forces unseen. Despite these persistent mysteries, life goes on. Merchants arrange their stalls, bakers knead dough, children chase one another through alleyways, and soldiers patrol the streets. Yet all actions occur under the subtle influence of the city's hidden pulse. Coins vanish and reappear in inexplicable places. Footsteps echo with no origin. Fleeting figures pass along the edges of perception, and lights float without clear source. Even leisure carries a thread of tension. Taverns hum with conversation and music, yet whispers of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and unexplainable sounds filter through the rooms, reminding patrons that nothing here is entirely ordinary. Travelers passing through remark on the unusual. Coins rolling without contact, doors opening with no hand, whispers brushing against ears carrying unfamiliar names and events that stick in memory inexplicably. By morning, Rome continues to pulse with life beyond ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind carries memory, secret, or hint of the unseen. Shadows twist, water moves in arcs that defy ordinary expectation, and human actions intertwine with currents of the mysterious, shaping reality subtly yet undeniably. The ordinary and extraordinary coexist inseparably, threading every step, meal, laugh, whisper, and glance, leaving citizens constantly aware that Rome is alive in ways no I can fully grasp. The city watches, shadows shift, unseen currents persist, and every day and night offers both wonder and unease, embedding the mystical into the rhythm of daily life, leaving impressions that linger in dreams and the quiet corners of consciousness. A reminder that existence here is a dance with forces beyond ordinary sight. As the sun climbs higher, casting golden light over the terracotta rooftops and stone streets of medieval Rome, the city awakens fully, yet the remnants of night's mystique linger, weaving themselves into every corner of daily life. Streets bustle with merchants displaying fruits, vegetables, spices, and textiles. Yet even in the ordinary commerce, subtle anomalies persist. Coins occasionally tumble across counters on their own, baskets of goods shift imperceptibly as if nudged by unseen hands, and the breeze carries whispers that dissipate before comprehension, leaving listeners with a lingering sense of unease. Within homes, families continue their routines. Bread is baked, porridge stirred, figs and cheese prepared for breakfast, yet shadows in corners bend and stretch in ways that defy the sun's angle, and murmurs drift softly from walls, forming syllables just at the edge of understanding. Children, often the first to perceive what adults dismiss, pause mid-play to watch fleeting images. Cloaked figures slipping through alleys, lanterns drifting unsupported, shadows that twist and slither against surfaces with no visible origin. Wealthy villas display signs of opulent living. Long tables laden with roasted fowl, honeyed cakes, spiced wine, and exotic fruits, yet mirrors and candlelight betray subtle distortions. Floorboards creak unexpectedly, steps echo where no one walks, and the servants move with cautious attentiveness, attuned to a rhythm beyond ordinary perception. Markets, though alive with the day's activity, reveal traces of the unseen. Produce arranged in almost symbolic patterns, coins moving independently, and faint murmurs in the wind carrying meaning to those able to perceive them. Craftsmen in workshops continue to experience strange phenomena. Blacksmiths notice molten iron forming faces and symbols unbidden. Weavers find threads reshaped into intricate, undecipherable glyphs overnight. Potters discover vessels etched with forms that vanish upon close inspection. The city's fountains and aqueducts carry an almost deliberate vitality. Water flows in spirals, reflecting sunlight to reveal fleeting ghostly images beneath its surface, while the Tiber whispers softly, carrying subtle vibrations that hint at unseen events or messages. Tales of mystical encounters circulate among citizens. Cloaked figures appearing briefly in courtyards, wells humming at night, lanterns floating along streets without human hands, doors opening and closing mysteriously, and shadows contorting into impossible shapes. Hidden gardens bloom with colors beyond perception, petals curling into geometric shapes and constellations, as faint musical vibrations fill the air, perceptible only to those attuned. The city's animals participate in the rhythm of the unseen. Cats stalk rooftops silently, eyes gleaming unnaturally, while dogs pause to bark or howl at spaces devoid of visible presence. Birds gather atop towers in deliberate, coordinated formations, creating patterns that unsettle any observer. In the temples, priests chant in measured tones, performing rituals to gods long forgotten. Candles drip wax into intricate patterns. Incense curls into shapes, faces, animals, symbols that vanish if observed directly. Worshippers leave with subtle impressions, touches in the air that were never there, glimpses of forms at the periphery of vision, thoughts seeded by unseen forces lingering in the mind. Despite the constant presence of the mysterious, life carries on. Children play, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, and soldiers patrol streets, yet all actions unfold under the subtle influence of the city's hidden pulse. Coins disappear and reappear, footsteps echo with no origin, fleeting figures brush along the edge of perception, and lights float without apparent source. Leisure carries a thread of tension. Taverns hum with conversation and music, Yet whispers of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and inexplicable sounds permeate the air, reminding patrons of the city's unseen dimensions. Travelers passing through take note. Coins roll without contact, doors creak open with no hand, and whispers brush their ears, carrying names, places, and events that seem at once foreign and compelling. By midday, Rome pulses with a life beyond ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind holds memory, secrets, or glimpses of the unseen. Shadows twist, water flows in impossible arcs, and human actions intertwine with subtle currents of mystery, shaping reality in ways imperceptible yet undeniable. The ordinary and extraordinary exist together, threading every meal, step, laugh, whisper, and glance into corners, leaving inhabitants aware that Rome is alive in ways no eye can fully comprehend. The city observes, shadows shift, unseen currents persist, and each day offers both wonder and unease, embedding the mystical into the rhythm of daily life, leaving traces in dreams and the quiet corners of thought, reminding all who dwell there that the ordinary is merely a thin veil over a far stranger, more alive reality. As afternoon settles over the rooftops and piazzas of medieval Rome, the city carries a rhythm that is both ordinary and impossibly strange, a pulse that beats beneath cobblestones, walls, and waterways, threading itself into every gesture and sound. Merchants call out their wares: fruits, vegetables, spices, textiles. Yet subtle anomalies linger. Coins appear where none were dropped, baskets of goods shift imperceptibly, and faint whispers ride the breeze, audible only to those who listen with care, their syllables hinting at names, places, or events untraceable yet compelling. Inside homes, families prepare meals of bread, cheese, figs, roasted meats, and porridge, moving through their routines with a quiet awareness of shadows that bend and stretch unnaturally. Candle flames flicker against walls, mirrors reflect subtle distortions, and murmurs drift from corners, sometimes forming words, sometimes only leaving a lingering sense of unease, as if the building itself breathes. Children, ever attuned to what adults dismiss, pause mid-play to point at fleeting images. Cloaked figures vanishing around corners, lanterns floating unsupported, or shadows twisting into impossible forms that seem to mock ordinary perception. Wealthy villas display the opulence of the city. Long tables laden with honeyed cakes, spiced wine, roasted fowl, and exotic fruits, yet anomalies persist. Footsteps echo in empty halls, mirrors bend reflections in subtle, impossible ways, and servants move with careful attentiveness, aware that something unseen threads through every corner. In the bustling workshops, craftsmen notice peculiar occurrences. Blacksmiths observe faces and shapes forming spontaneously in molten iron. Weavers find threads arranging themselves into intricate glyphs overnight. Potters discover vessels etched with forms that vanish when closely inspected, leaving only faint impressions of lines and curves that seem almost intentional. The fountains and aqueducts carry their own rhythm. Water flows in arcs that appear deliberate, forming spirals and patterns that seem to communicate, reflecting sunlight to create fleeting images beneath the surface. Tales of unusual events circulate among citizens. A cloaked figure glimpsed in courtyards and vanished moments later, a well humming with imperceptible vibrations. Lanterns floating along streets with no visible bearer, doors opening or closing of their own accord. Shadows contorting into impossible serpentine shapes. Hidden gardens bloom in astonishing, phosphorescent colors, petals curling into geometric forms and miniature constellations, while faint, musical vibrations hum through the air, perceptible only to those who attune their senses. The city's animals seem to follow the rhythm of the unseen. Cats stalk rooftops silently, golden eyes gleaming unnaturally. Dogs pause to bark or howl at empty corners. Birds gather atop towers in deliberate, coordinated formations, creating patterns that unsettle any observer who notices. Within the temples, priests chant low, hypnotic prayers, performing rituals to gods long forgotten. Candles drip wax into intricate, unplanned shapes. Incense curls into improbable forms. Faces, animals, symbols that vanish when directly observed. Worshippers depart with impressions of touches that were never there, glimpses of forms at the periphery of vision, and thoughts seeded by unseen forces lingering long after leaving. Despite the persistent presence of the mysterious, life continues. Children play, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, soldiers patrol streets, yet all actions unfold under the subtle influence of the city's hidden pulse. Coins vanish and reappear inexplicably, footsteps echo with no origin, fleeting figures brush past perception, and lights float without visible source. Even moments of leisure carry unease. Taverns hum with conversation and music, yet whispers of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and inexplicable sounds filter through the air. Travelers passing through remark on oddities. Coins roll without touch, doors open with no hand, whispers brush ears carrying names, places, and events that feel foreign yet compelling. By afternoon, Rome pulses with life beyond ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind carries memory, secret, or glimpse of the unseen. Shadows twist, water flows in impossible arcs, and human actions intertwine with currents of mystery, shaping reality subtly yet undeniably. The ordinary and extraordinary coexist inseparably, threading meals, steps, laughter, whispers, and glances, leaving inhabitants aware that Rome is alive far beyond what the eye perceives. The city watches, shadows shift, unseen currents persist, and each day offers both wonder and unease, embedding the mystical into daily rhythms, leaving traces in dreams and quiet corners of thought, a persistent reminder that the ordinary is merely a thin veil over a far stranger, more alive reality. As evening descends over medieval Rome, the city's ordinary rhythms begin to blend seamlessly with the unseen currents of mystery, creating a world where daily life and the supernatural coexist in subtle, unsettling harmony. Streets that were bustling hours earlier quiet down, yet faint echoes of activity persist. Footsteps that do not belong to anyone, distant laughter that fades too abruptly, and murmurs that seem carried by the wind from no identifiable source. Within homes, families prepare the evening meal: bread, cheese, figs, roasted meats, and stews simmering in clay pots. But even in these familiar routines, anomalies abound. Candle flames flicker unpredictably, shadows bend at impossible angles, and whispers slip through corners of rooms, sometimes forming fragments of words or names that linger in memory long after being heard. Children, particularly sensitive to these subtleties, pause mid-step, pointing toward fleeting shapes and figures. Cloaked forms vanishing around doorways, lanterns floating unsupported along the streets, or shadows that stretch and coil against walls in ways that defy explanation. In opulent villas, dinners unfold with feasts of honeyed cakes, spiced wine, roasted fowl, and exotic fruits. Yet even here, anomalies persist. Mirrors reflect subtle distortions, floorboards creak with no apparent cause, and faint echoes reverberate in empty corridors. Servants move with a careful awareness, their senses attuned to disturbances invisible to ordinary eyes. Marketplaces, emptied for the evening, retain traces of the day's commerce. Produce and baskets of goods seem arranged in almost deliberate formations. Coins occasionally roll or disappear inexplicably, and soft whispers ride the breeze, carrying meaning only perceptible to the attuned. Craftsmen in workshops continue to witness strange phenomena. Blacksmiths observe faces and symbols forming in molten iron. Weavers discover threads reshaping themselves into intricate, undecipherable glyphs overnight. Potters find vessels etched with forms that vanish if closely inspected, leaving only faint impressions that hint at purpose. The fountains, aqueducts, and rivers carry subtle currents of their own. Water flows in spirals and arcs that suggest intent, reflecting lamplight to create fleeting, ghostly images below the surface. while the Tiber hums softly, vibrating with a rhythm that seems to whisper secrets to those who linger nearby. Tales of the city's strange happenings continue to circulate. A cloaked figure appears briefly in a courtyard before vanishing without trace. A well hums low at midnight, producing vibrations felt more than heard, interpreted as warning or guidance. Lanterns drift along streets with no visible bearer. Doors open or close of their own volition. Shadows twist into serpentine or impossible forms. Hidden gardens bloom in dazzling colors invisible during the day, petals curling into geometric patterns or miniature constellations, while faint musical vibrations resonate through the air, perceptible only to those who are attuned. The city's animals participate in this unseen rhythm. Cats move silently across rooftops, eyes reflecting lamplight with unnatural intensity. Dogs pause, bark, or howl at empty spaces. Birds gather atop towers in deliberate formations, their precise positioning suggesting communication beyond human understanding. Within temples, priests chant low, steady tones, performing ancient rituals to gods long forgotten. Wax drips into intricate, unplanned patterns. Incense curls into shapes, animals, faces, symbols that vanish when observed directly. Worshippers depart altered, carrying impressions of touches that were never present, fleeting glimpses at the edge of vision, and thoughts subtly influenced by forces unseen. Despite the persistent mysteries, daily life continues. Children laugh and play, merchants barter, bakers knead dough, soldiers patrol, yet all actions unfold under the influence of the city's hidden pulse. Coins vanish and reappear inexplicably, footsteps echo with no origin, fleeting figures brush past perception, and lights float unaccounted for. Leisure, too, is tinged with unease. Taverns hum with music and conversation, yet whispers of floating lanterns, moving shadows, and unexplainable sounds filter through the rooms, leaving patrons alert even in moments of relaxation. Travelers passing through the city note the unusual. Coins rolling without contact, doors opening with no hand, whispers brushing their ears carrying names, places, and events they cannot trace, yet feel compelled to remember. By nightfall, Rome pulses with life beyond ordinary perception. Every stone, fountain, leaf, and breath of wind carries memory, secret, or glimpse of the unseen. Shadows twist, water flows in impossible arcs, and human actions intertwine with currents of mystery, shaping reality subtly yet undeniably. The ordinary and extraordinary coexist inseparably, threading through meals, steps, laughter, whispers, and glances, leaving inhabitants aware that the city is alive in ways that no eye can fully comprehend. Rome watches, shadows shift, unseen currents persist, and each evening offers both wonder and unease, embedding the mystical into the rhythms of daily life, leaving impressions that linger in dreams and in the quiet corners of thought, a persistent reminder that nothing in this city is ever truly ordinary.